Hello, welcome back to another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I'm Eric. I did 11 years in prison, and I talk about prison stuff. In today's episode, I'm going to be continuing my story in El Dorado. In the last episode where I was talking about this, I kind of told the story about how I beat up a guy named Mers, and I ended up moving in with my buddy Kevin. In this episode, I'm going to be continuing my story where I left off. I'm going to be telling you about something that was very important during my time in prison, and it's called the XLJCs. And I have talked about that a little bit before in other videos, but today I'm going to get in a little bit more detail. Okay, so be sure to like and subscribe if that's your thing. And here we go. Prior to moving in with Kevin, prior to moving over to the dorm, I got involved with an organization known as the XLJCs. It was Freedom who got me involved with the XLJCs initially. The XLJCs is a nonprofit organization that works within the prison in El Dorado. I actually don't know if it's still in existence. It might have fallen apart and gone by the wayside. The JCs as a whole is an international organization. You know, they go by JCI, JCs International. And they're more or less a leadership development organization. They're a nonprofit, and they do a lot of great things around the world. There have been U.S. presidents that have been in the JCs. There's been celebrities that have been involved with the organization. I believe John Cena is in the JCs. So a lot of famous people, a lot of heavy hitters in the organization. Pretty cool. Now, JCs within El Dorado, the chapter there is known as the XLJCs. And their goal is to provide effective programs and services within the prison that will prepare individuals for their release and reintegration into society. Think self-help, life skills, stuff like that. We had classes, that ranged from financial management, interpersonal communication, fatherhood, 7 habits of highly effective people, character first. We had all these cool classes that went on and we were involved with or we facilitated on our own. Because not only did we have our own classes, but if reentry had a class that they wanted to teach, they would often come to the JCs and ask us to do it. But how I got involved with the organization, Freedom Hazelton, who I don't really think that highly of now, was the management development vice president. So the goal of the organization was to provide effective programs and services. However, the prison didn't pay for that. Inmates did. So we had fundraisers throughout the year where we would sell stuff that you couldn't get on Canteen. Administration would approve it, activities would approve it, and we would get food in from the outside and we would sell that to the general population to raise funds for what we did in the prison. Now, another thing that we did is we had a food stand out in visitation. If you came up to visit your loved one, or if your people came up to visit you, then you could buy food out there. And all that money went to supporting our classes. Paper, ink for printers, highlighters, all that stuff. That all was paid for by our fundraising activities. Freedom was the management development vice president. He was the vice president in charge of the fundraisers and stuff like that. The area over classes was called individual development, and that had its own vice president. And then you had enrollment and growth, which was basically for recruitment and stuff like that. And you also had community development, which the community area would basically hold activities and projects within the prison, like card games or a volleyball tournament or a baseball tournament or something like that, just to get people together, get them out of their box, and build a stronger community within the prison. At the time that Freedom approached me about the JCs, he needed someone to do the paperwork for him for the food stand. I'm going to take my glasses off here because I'm sweating up a storm. Freedom needed someone to do the paperwork for the food stand. The food stand had all sorts of inventory out there food-wise. And, when you talk about paper plates and stuff like that, all that stuff was inventoried. We had to be able to account for everything we sold out there and all the money that we made out there at any time. Administration could come in and they could look at our paperwork and make sure if anything was stolen or what. Plus, we had to have an accurate record of what we were making out there. Business-wise, that's what you're supposed to do. Freedom wanted me to be a director for management development. He wanted me to be his director, so he had me doing the paperwork out there. He had me going out to the food stand and selling food on the weekends and making food on the weekends, stuff like that. I was kind of running it out there. He picked me because he thought that I was smart. He thought I was good at math, and so that's what we did. However, after I had my falling out with Freedom and stuff, I wasn't really feeling it, and I kind of wanted to back away from everything. There was kind of a bad taste in my mouth about the whole situation. You know, Freedom was talking about telling on me, and I don't have a lot of respect for stuff like that. However, Kevin, the guy that I moved in with, had just become the president or the vice president of enrollment and growth, and he needed a director for his area. So I started working with Kevin, and it started small, but we ended up taking over that organization. As enrollment and growth, we developed all sorts of new programs, you know, for involvement in the Jaycees. They have a program called the Degrees of Jaycees, which basically it's your degree of involvement with the organization. Are you taking classes? Are you mentoring others? Are you striving to build yourself up? And we rewrote that program for Population Division 9 chapters. So you have the Jaycees on the outside, and they run things a certain way, but a Population Division 9 chapter, or a Pop 9 chapter, is run differently because it exists in an institution. So there's stuff that we couldn't do for the degrees program, like going to BB gun shoots and stuff like that. That's not going to happen. We're in prison, right? So we rewrote that program. We recruited all sorts of people into our membership. We went from like 35 members. We went from like 35 members to 75 members. We hit the membership cap. In the meantime, I was still doing food stand paperwork just to help Kevin out, really, more than anything. Not so much Freedom, because that was important to the chapter. And Kevin was on the board. There were other people on the board besides Freedom that I did like and respect, so I wanted to help out with the chapter. So even though I couldn't stand Freedom, I was still helping out. Now, eventually, Kevin decided to run for president of the organization. The organization did have a president that was over all the other vice presidents, and he had been president for a long time. His name was Ormond Wimberly, and Kevin beat him pretty easily and became president of the chapter. After Kevin did that, I really got in and started streamlining stuff with a food stand. At that point, my best friend was the president of the chapter, so I didn't care what Freedom said. There were things going on with that food stand that were backwards. For example, everything was done on paper. We had computers that we had access to. So I put that all onto, a computer spreadsheet with programs and stuff, so it could automatically track your inventory and your waste and your gratuity and your revenues, all that stuff, your expenses. And it would also predict. I wrote a program that could predict trends in what was going to sell on a certain weekend throughout the year. And so we knew what to have in our inventory. And we could look at our program and say, okay, well, that's not going to sell this weekend. We don't need to order that. This is what we need to order. So that was a big deal. And because I got involved with that, I began to move up the board. I started out as a director, and then I became secretary. And as a secretary, I was supposed to keep track of minutes for the board meetings. So I would keep track of the meeting minutes and things that were up for discussion and stuff like that. We followed Robert's Rules of Order. So if you guys are familiar with that, you already know what it entails. But it's basically keeping track of things that were going on, what we had been talking about, issues that were up for discussion, what was on the table, what wasn't on the table, stuff like that. That was my job. But the programs that I wrote were so effective and so efficient. Eventually, I got moved up to business vice president, right underneath Kevin as the second in command of the organization. And basically, I was still taking care of all the business stuff, and whatever Kevin needed help with, if there was something that he couldn't do, he didn't have time to do, I did that. And I also took care of our organization's newsletter. So we had a quarterly newsletter that we put out. I was the editor for that. I was responsible for getting newsletter articles, getting it all in, a certain format and checking the grammar, punctuation, etc., and putting that out quarterly. But we did that. We ran that organization from, I want to say 2011 to 2012, right up until the time Kevin left. And I was still involved when I left. So, it was really cool. It taught me a lot of leadership skills. It taught me how to keep my head on straight when people were getting kind of squirrely with me, because you have to act professionally in that sort of situation. But yeah, I just thought I'd talk about the Jaycees a little bit. I have some more stories about that, but I think I've rambled on for long enough in this video. I'll continue my story in the next video. I'm Eric. This has been another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I will see y'all later. Right, they say.